All right, welcome back to another episode of Take Back My Brain. I'm your host, Laurie Hammer, and I have a repeat guest today, which I'm very excited about. His name is Josh Dech. So I want you to go back and listen to this past episode that we had previous because we're having a lot of foundational things. And today we're going to dive into more all things gut. And Josh is an expert in gut health, and I deeply respect him. So pay attention, take notes, share, like, subscribe, do all those beautiful things, and just enjoy this episode because life and death really begins in the gut. I'm all about the brain, like balance your brain first, and then the gut gets easier to heal. But, they both go back and forth. And so brain affects your gut, gut affects your brain. And so I'm really excited to dive deeper. So Josh, thanks for being here today.
Laurie, thanks so much for having me back again. I'm so glad the first was so beneficial to your listeners. We're happy to expand on this and bring more information to it. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. So I'm kind of been in this mode lately, like how do I simplify things for people, right? And I keep thinking, we're in this bounce back culture. We're in this, quick, microwave culture. We're in the soccer moms, we've got all these things going on. And so we don't take very good care of our gut.
Mm.
And if we have one little symptom, we're like, oh, I got to fix it. I bet it's an infection. I got to go to the doctor. Or, maybe you have some reflux issues going on. Oh my gosh, I better go get some Tums or some Prilosec or, whatever it might be. And I feel like because we have this such fast-paced culture, we're looking for such a fast-paced reaction, fix, and we're really damaging our most valuable asset in our body. So
Mhm.
I really want to dive into that today so that we can teach people like, one, we really need to slow down for one. And then what's that? What are those signs and symptoms? Signs and symptoms aren't bad. They're a signal. And, what happens if we do use those antacids and those antibiotics? What are we shifting and damaging? And then how do we fix it kind of thing? Sound good?
Well, that sounds amazing. So where do you want to start? That's everything all at once.
I know, right? So I would love to dive into I feel like there's like this whole antacid like epidemic going on. Everybody's got reflux,
Mm.
everybody's like, oh, I'm nauseous all the time. My throat hurts. So many people are getting diagnosed with Barrett's disease, all those kind of things. Like, but let's talk about like why do you feel or that those issues are increasing for one, and then what are the ramifications of using medication to, relieve those symptoms?
That is a great question. So the first thing we have to understand is that your body is always speaking to you. It uses a language that we call signs and symptoms. Now, you and I, Laurie, we're speaking the English language. We have thousands of words at our disposal to use when we're fluent in this language, so we can have a very productive, meaningful, life-altering, in many cases, conversation between you and I. The problem is our body also speaks its own language called symptomatology.
Mm.
Now, when we look into the gut, it only says maybe a dozen, maybe 15 words, depends on what you argue, but it says words like gas, bloat, constipation,
Yep.
diarrhea, acid reflux, increase, decrease appetite, pain, cramping, blood, mucus sometimes. These are the words it can communicate to you, which we have to learn to interpret. Those words carry a meaning. And when we understand that meaning, we can go back to our root causes and figure out what's happening. The problem is when we have these symptoms popping up in the gut, we look at the gut and go, it must be only the gut, but ignoring the rest of the symptoms your body's speaking, the rest of the words in its vocabulary. There's probably 13,000 different words your gut or your body can speak to you through blood work and other signs and other symptoms,
Sure.
with something like 30 quadrillion combinations of things you can kind of put together. So it really is a very vast language. Now, when we look at these symptoms, our job is to try to reduce them because symptoms suck. We don't want to have like a sign is what you see, a symptom is what you feel. So if
Right.
I'm bloated, the sign is the physical distension. The symptom is maybe pain or heaviness.
Yeah.
So one condition can kind of have both. That's an idea. Now, if I look at something like acid reflux, that is both a sign and a symptom. You can see
Right.
physically the burning, the esophageal issues, Barrett's esophagus, like you mentioned, and then you can feel the symptom, which is the burning and that coming up of food if you have a full GERD condition. Now, what we do, we pursue comfort. So we say, I'm going to suppress this sign or this symptom to make it go away so I feel better.
Right.
But what we're doing it's like if you take a hostage, Lori, in your living room, don't take hostages. This isn't a call to say take hostages. If
Right.
you take one in your living room and they're screaming and crying and yelling for help and you put tape over their mouth, they're still not happy to be there. You just
Right.
can't hear them. And so we have acid reflux and we just simply take an antacid. We're trying to suppress the acid, assuming the problem is excessive acid in the body. I have never, in 10 years of working in the health
No.
space, all these years of gut specific, you've never, I'm sure, seen someone with too much acid.
Nope.
It is always too low,
Leadville. Yep.
right? And so you have this feedback mechanism between these sphincters, these open and closed doors above and below your stomach where they enter and exit. And those are pressure and pH sensitive. Well, if you don't have enough pressure from fluid volume, so the actual level of acid, you don't have a low enough pH, so more acidity, they just kind of flap open. So of
Mhm.
course things pop up. How many people do you know who repeatedly take antacids and they actually don't help or they get worse? They
Yeah.
lay on their back,
Yeah.
they're like, oh, I'm worse. Well, of course you are. Low acid was the problem. Now you're suppressing it further. You're feeding the problem.
Right.
And this is the start, Lori. I don't have to tell you how much of a start this is to almost every condition you can imagine. You start taking antacids, you're almost guaranteed to have worsened digestive issues in weeks, months, or many years down the road, which will take a long time and often be very expensive to fix.
Oh yeah. I mean, you think about, Crohn's colitis, which is like, at the end of the GI tract, or
Yep.
even SIBO, right? And, we spend so much time killing stuff when really we got to go back to, do you even make enough hydrochloric acid?
Yeah.
And, kind of go back to that. And then we have to say, well, why is your hydrochloric acid low? And then hopefully, address those issues. So what do you think are some causes of low hydrochloric acid?
First and foremost is stress. Now, so many of us, this is the obvious low-hanging fruit answer. So many of us say, well, I'm not stressed. I'm very zen. We are, and we often just don't know it. I can be a modern 2024 hippie,
That was
but I
awesome.
thank you very much. Another t-shirt I'll have to make.
Right.
So we go in, we're stuck in traffic, we're irritated, we're arguing with our spouse, there's money issues, there's political issues, there's the news all the time, the radio bombarding us because their job is to keep your attention. Humans respond to fear. Most of us will know this. If you go and look at reviews or you hear someone talk about something, they're more likely to complain than they are to praise it. Our bodies are biologically wired to respond to fear as a survival mechanism from thousands of years ago. We walked around naked in the forest and had to fight bears. And so our job is to respond to stress. And so we're constantly bombarded by it because in the attention economy of 2024, you keep attention by eliciting a stress response, be it good or bad. There is eustress, which is good, and there's distress, which is bad stress, but we're constantly bombarded by it. Well, that starts to elicit this fight and flight mechanism, which is the opposite of rest digest. If you're in rest digest, you're resting and digesting, which means you have good motility. You're producing things to digest, stomach acid, digestive enzymes. But if we're constantly turning up the dial on this fight or flight, rather than turning it down to rest and digest, we're turning up to anxiousness, to poor motility, to less stomach acid production. And it's these low grade stressors. Someone goes, well, I'd be more stressed living in a mud hut naked in the woods running from bears. 100% agreed. But that would happen once every couple of weeks. You'd run, you'd fight, you'd flee, you're fine. But we are bombarded by constant low grade stressors every day that hammer and hammer and hammer and chip away at us until we have these disease processes that slowly, insidiously creep up. That would be the first one.
Okay.
Yeah, second way, unless you want to jump on that one, I'll move
No,
on to that one.
that was perfect. Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. Well, let's
Yeah.
talk about the second one then. The first one is going to be stress. The second one I would argue is dietary and nutrient deficiencies. We consume so many things that suppress our ability or our body's ability to do its job. We mangle up our own bacteria, which we have through our intestines, which again feedback stress responses, etc. We're not eating nutrient-rich food. We need nutrients and vitamins and minerals. We need them to even produce things like stomach acid or digestion to detoxify the body, leaving us in this healthy state to rest and digest. And so we're constantly bombarding or giving our body a lack of what it needs, bombarding it with more illness, which again feeds back to the fight and flight and stress responses through what we call the cell danger response, which is
Right.
like a microbial, a cellular level response, not a big, I'm freaking out, having a panic attack response, but even your cells on a microscopic level understand that you're stressed and they respond accordingly. And so we get these feedback mechanisms from small to big that continue feeding in. Or zinc deficient. You need zinc to create stomach acid in the first place. We're
Right.
mostly deficient in that because we're stressed and inflamed and sick, and we're burning through these, we got toxins coming in from every which way, left, right, and center, bombarding our system. We're utilizing these nutrients at an increased rate to try to heal the body. It's like we have fires all over the place. You live on an acreage. You have one well. You live on well water. You have enough to shower, to drink, to cook with. But the minute you need more, like the house is on fire, that well drains and it empties. You have no
Yeah.
more left. So you can't
Yeah.
even do your basic functions anymore. And this is how nutrients sort of function and perform in the body. We have what we need from food, but the excess of toxins and stress and all these things coming into us all the time through our day to day is also beginning to deplete these nutrients we need to even perform our basic functions like stomach acid production.
Yeah. Would you say also, those stressors or, being nutrient deficient, if we're not eating foods that actually stimulate hydrochloric acid production, kind of like if you don't use it, you lose it. So this
Mm.
movement toward being, like vegan, vegetarian, where you're not eating meat, so you don't really need a ton of hydrochloric acid if you're not eating animal products. Um, do you agree with that? Like if you don't use
I
it, you
think that's
lose it?
spot on. Yeah, I mean, I can speak to both sides of that. Years back, before I knew better, I tried vegan. I heard the train, heard the trend. I jumped on the train, right? I watched all the videos, and I was like, well, maybe there's merit to it. So, I'm heavy into bodybuilding and nutrition. I understand this,
Sure.
and so I micromanage every microgram, all my nutrients, make sure I got enough of what I needed. All the macros were balanced. I had never felt worse in my
I
entire
know.
life, right? I
Yeah.
was bloated. I was weak. My strength went down. I actually my body started to change shapes in the worst ways. I felt like an old bag of milk. And so I went back to eating meat and I felt better. And then I swung in the other direction to try a full carnivore diet. And lo and behold, I felt amazing.
Mm-hmm.
But on both ends of the spectrum, North Americans, statistically speaking, do not have enough of the microbes we need to break down fibers and turn them into short chain fatty acids like butyrate and propionate, these things that we need for our body for health in all kinds of ways. So
Right.
we don't have these bacteria, whereas like someone living in rural Nigeria on a farm, they have way more of them, right? So they
Sure.
can eat these things that we can't. So our body will produce extra bacteria which can produce its own short chain fatty acids without having to break down fiber. So we compensate. But I went to the vegan diet, all this extra fiber, I felt bloaty and gassy. The argument is maybe I needed more time than the 8 weeks I gave it before I gave up and said, screw this, in order for me to feel better. So I couldn't break down all these fibers. On the other hand, many years later, this was just probably what, a year ago or so, 2 years ago, I went full carnivore, steak, like lion diet, meat and water and salt. And I had diarrhea for about a week. And so the argument then is my gut bacteria has to compensate and change for this
Right.
dramatic. I was eating probably 50-50 plants and fruits and vegetables
Sure.
with meat, but I had to learn to produce more stomach acid to stimulate that growth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I wasn't before. My body had to alter its bacterial profiling, and it can in just a couple of days to be able to compensate for the new fuel I'm putting in for. It's constantly balancing what you're doing in its dietary habits. And there's all kinds of other reasons why, based on your composition, what sicknesses or overgrowths you might have, why these diets may not work, or why you may feel good on things like carnivore. There's merit to all of it, but it's situational. But long and short, 100%, if you don't use it, you lose it because your body adapts to what it is doing at the time, altering the landscape of your gut, changing your ability to break down, digest, and absorb.
Right. So and when people are changing your diet, like you were talking about your example, it's not a bad thing to get those symptoms of the loose stools, those types of things if you're going into keto, say carnivore, because your body is just adjusting. Like those are not bad symptoms. They're just letting us know, hey, things are trying to shift. It's kind of hard right now. But, I feel like that's a good thing too. It's like a hormetic stress. Like
Totally.
yeah, it's good. We need those types of good stressors
Yeah, I
in
mean, provided they're
diet to
not,
shift our micro.
I agree. And it's provided those symptoms aren't persisting in such a way where you're actually having a lot of negative effects, your gut's
Yes.
getting worse, your chronic diarrhea. Like I went for a week and I knew what was happening. If you're getting a lot of it, maybe ease into it. Start going
Yeah.
50-50 in your meals, 60-40, 70-30, and slowly alter. I just went cold turkey. I went from 50-50 right to 100% meat.
Right.
I expected diarrhea. I knew it was going to happen. So I braced myself quite literally, like waiting for it to happen. And so, but if you're somebody who comes in and you go, well, I'm actually getting more pains and aches, you're having other symptoms besides like loose stool, whoop-dee. That's not that big of a deal if you know it's, like you said, a hermetic stress,
Yeah.
a biological stressor changing the landscape of your body. However, when it comes associated with brain fog, joint pain, fatigue, skin issues, more pain, cramping, bloating, blood or mucus in the stool, skin issues, cognitive issues, hormonal issues, you're creating something that's actually more problematic, and it's a monster your body can't tame.
Yeah.
And so you might actually have other things going on. But this leads into the conversation is, why is vegan good for one? Why is carnivore good for
Yes.
another? Why
Yeah.
is mixed good for somebody else? It's a whole can of worms.
Yes. Big can of worms. So let's open it up.
Let's do it. That's
All
very
right.
aggressive. All right.
Let's open
So,
it.
well, let's get into it. So it comes down to, there's a great study I quote often, was in Cell Reports, and I believe 2018, 2019, where they actually took GI maps. So that's a stool sample where they measure your gut bacteria, the microbes, and they actually measured urbanized societies of Western culture versus rural and urban societies and cultures of Nigerian colonies, who still have very much a hunter-gatherer type of lifestyle. And
Right.
they found these hunter-gatherers in the rural, living on the farm, walking around barefoot, no pesticides, interacting with the animals, drinking the water, eating the foods right off the tree. They had a much greater abundance of bacteria and variety, as well as microbes that can actually break down fiber. Because your body, you don't actually create enzymes on your own accord. You make
Right.
your fiber, you break down your fats, proteins, carbs. You can't break down fiber. Your gut bacteria has to do that and ferment them into things it can utilize. So if you eat and you poop, so do your bacteria. They effectively will eat this and poop out good things. And we lack those microbes in the West. We tend to not have the ones that can break down fiber as much. So in these instances, I believe personally, this is why things like the lion diet from Michaela Peterson, why these carnivore diets are so efficient and profound in their
Yeah.
results, because we're not feeding the microbes that are creating or pooping out these bad things. Parasites, huge abundance. You see people coming in all the time curing supposedly their eczema. It's a huge sign of parasites is eczema and psoriasis. Well,
Yeah.
if it goes away, what do parasites love to eat? Fibers,
Fiber.
much more than meat, right? So they're
Yeah.
not in there pooping out bad things. Your body then churns over and reacts to creating these symptoms of eczema. And this is why I believe it works. Now, I do believe we know your body uses fiber. We also know there's a greater abundance of microbes that digest fiber in these hunter-gatherer tribes. We've seen the stool samples. You get guys like Tim Spector who go over and live with these cultures and these tribes, and they live in these villages. And in a couple of days, their gut microbes already changing because of what they're
So
introducing.
fast. That's
So
amazing.
fast. Oh, it's
Yeah.
amazing what it does in a few
Yeah.
days. And so we know that they can do this, but they don't have any of the diseases that we have. So the argument that humans should never eat plants, I think, is also silly. I think it's what we do to our plants in North America,
Oh, spot on. Yeah.
right? 18 to 20,000 different pesticides approved for use in North America. Of course, you're going to jack up your gut and gut bacteria. Of course, you're going to destroy them using these chemicals that they don't have in nature. Look at their
Right.
teeth, right? The teeth of a
Right.
lot of these
Yeah.
African countries, they have white, sparkling, beautiful teeth. Ours are rotting and yellow over here because our
Mhm.
oral microbiome is eating our teeth. It's
Yeah.
producing lactic acid, acetic acid, byproducts, chewing up our mouth and destroying our teeth. But
Mhm.
over there, they don't have it because they're actually feeding natural things. An apple is like a natural toothbrush. Well, it grows on a tree and it's not sprayed with 80 pesticides.
Right.
So it's very different. And I think it all needs to be contextually understood that maybe carnivore isn't the best for everyone. Even long term, I think it's circumstantially beneficial to just not contribute to the problem until you can properly remove it.
Yeah. 100%. So when we're talking about, over Nigeria and the rural Nigeria, and they're able to eat all these things, and, here because of all the chemicals and stuff we spray, how important is it to eat organic, biodynamic?
Oh,
And like, can somebody heal if they're, say, 50-50, 60-40, still eating conventionally sprayed things versus organic? Like, I really want to dispel that because that's a tough one. I live in rural Iowa, right? And so in my, sorry, hold on just one second. Exciting things going on outside. I live in rural Iowa, and so my organic section in my grocery store is like this big, right?
mhm.
We have zucchini, we have apples, we may get cucumbers. and maybe throw in a broccoli and a cauliflower every now and then. And then we've got, you know, all the rest of this. And then we live in glyphosate country. We live in atrazine country.
Yeah.
Things are sprayed in the air. So if somebody's saying, well, how do I get, you know, organic foods? How do I get grass fed if I live in the middle of somewhere like I do? I mean, I find all the resources because I work really hard at it. And it's very rare that we have something that's not grass fed, organic, pastured, you know, all those kind of things. But what would you say to somebody who's like, well, can't I eat 50-50 and that's, you know, 50% better than what I was doing before? And will I heal?
I can say unquestionably, absolutely yes.
Okay.
Because you think about it, if my body is a glass of water, the emptier it is, the better I'm going to be. Because as
Right.
that water starts to fill up, things overflow, pesticides, stress, toxins, chemicals, junk food, inflammatory foods, they start to fill up my glass. When that glass overflows, now I have disease processes and symptoms. We need to have proper drainage to drain things out the bottom of that glass. That's how your body stays healthy. It fills up, it drains out. It fills up and cleans, it drains out. But we have this blockage of this drainage with too many chemicals coming in. Your body has a very well adapted broom and dustpan. It cleans up what it's designed to clean up. But we're living in an age where on a daily basis, we're dumping a landfill's worth of junk into our body, and a broom and dustpan no longer is efficient to clean it up. And so the less we contribute to that glass, 100% the better. Now, I'm going to throw some stats, but don't quote me on the exact numbers. They actually came from Dr. Tom O'Brien. I had him on episode 49 of my podcast. We talked about reversing disease through what he calls the inflammation equation. There's a great big documentary they just put out about it. So
Yes.
we had him on the episode for a promo. But some of the numbers were something like they had pregnant women, for example, coming in. They tracked them over the course of 7 or 8 years after delivery, and they found that the chemicals, like phthalates through perfumes and nail polish and little things, by removing those, there was an average of 7 points higher IQ in the children by just
Wow.
removing those chemicals. That's amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
7 points is the difference between what's considered special or, you know, challenged, or maybe
Yeah.
working their ass off and getting C's to just kind of cruising along with A's and really getting concepts.
Yeah.
That's the difference. And they also found that women who changed, assuming they were eating 21 meals a week, that's 3 meals a day for 7 days, they
Mm-hmm.
changed three, I believe it was just 3 meals that they changed to purely organic. So that's
Mm-hmm.
3 out of 21 meals they changed. And their increase in, I believe it was probability of delivering a healthy baby full to term, it decreased their stillbirth rates by like 20 something percent,
Wow.
increased the likelihood of having healthy pregnancy and healthy children by just changing 3 out of 21. So going
Mm-hmm.
50%, I think, is huge. And
Huge.
this is where I go right back for very basics. Let's keep it easy. Go to the Environmental Working Group, EWG, their world famous list. They have the
Yep.
clean 15 and the dirty dozen. Clean 15, you can eat whatever you want off that list. It's very little in pesticides. The dirty dozen, I will not eat an inorganic fruit ever. I would
No,
rather go
ever,
without fruit,
ever. Mhm.
100%. And so you get things every year: blueberries, strawberries, I believe it's nectarines or peaches, apples, spinach. These are the things that are on the list every year. Grapes, because they're so full of pesticides. I believe the average strawberry is something like 8 to 12 different chemicals in the US that you actually purchase. And there's 18 to 20,000 different pesticides approved for use in the USA, which is shocking in itself. Over 1 billion pounds a year that are sprayed on our food. And so by just simply reducing some of these chemicals, we can reduce our exposure. We're reducing the amount that's going into your glass, and your body's natural cleaning, draining processes can remove it. So we're dumping less of the landfill into your body. It can
Yeah.
do a remarkable job of cleaning up.
I love it. I love it. So, because it gets overwhelming to people, right? You know, like I can only change, you know, these 3 things. Well, that's fantastic. That's
Yeah.
3 things that you didn't change before. And so, you know, that puts you on, you know, that healing path. So I love that. Um, what about antibiotic use? I mean, we're talking about grass-fed, you know, meats, but you know, so that's in our food system as well. But what about just antibiotic use, you know, for colds and flus and infections, you know,
Yeah.
tonsils or whatever it might be? I mean, I was a kid that was inundated with antibiotics. I had chronic tonsillitis and ear infections, and so my microbiome was horrific, and I suffered with constipation since, you know, I was super little. And it took a long time to reverse that, you know, once I understood what was going on.
Yeah, I think this is a great topic to bring up because First of all, it drives me nuts when doctors just throw antibiotics at people for colds and flus. They're identified as being a viral issue. So an antibiotic for bacterium is not really going to do anything. We said,
No.
well, let's just try it just in case. And the idea is your microbiome, I argue it's as important as our DNA. I've talked to people about this before and they go, no, our DNA is important. I don't want to talk about it. Well, you're shutting yourself off from a basic concept. You think about it, the entire human genome has been mapped. There's something like 23, maybe 25,000 different genes that make up the human genome. So all of your genetics and DNA. On the other hand, inside of your gut, there's 3 million different types of genes. So we have 130 times more genetic material inside of your gut by the different strains and species and all these different varieties that we have. There's 50 to 100 trillion microbes that make up your body. They outnumber you.
Cool.
The idea was maybe 10 to 1. Some studies are showing it's more like 1 to 1.3 to 5. But point being, there's more microbes, bacteria and fungi and viruses and parasites and archaea and all these little things. There's more of them than there are your actual human cells. When we take antibiotics, antibiotics do different things. They work in different ways. If you were to go hunting, for example, right? You and me, Laurie, we're going out hunting and you want to hunt a specific animal. I don't know how to kill certain animals, but let's say for the example, God forbid, you're hunting dogs. Well, we know, right? Just for the example, because I know it's bad for dogs. I love dogs in my life.
Oh, my dogs are in the background going like this.
I know. I got Bruce down here laying on his back with his balls in the air. And so what's bad for dogs, right? Grapes, raisins, chocolate, certain types of fruits that they can't have. They're very toxic to them. So if you wanted to harm a dog, God forbid you're going to hell, but if you wanted to harm a dog, you would know specifically what things to give them that would make them sick. But it wouldn't make a tiger or a lions or bears, oh my, it wouldn't make them sick, just the dog, because their biology doesn't react to it. Well, antibiotics, what they do is they will kill, say, all mammals because it might eat away it'll block out their mucous membranes, causing them to break down and degrade, or it will destroy some of the protein structures or prevent them from creating vital food sources that keep them alive. Antibiotics cast a broad net, in generally speaking, that destroy all these types of bacteria. So instead of just one type of animal, it kills the entire mammal species or all the marine life, not one type of fish. And so antibiotics kill in such a broad spectrum, they kill the good and the bad. If you have an invasive species, sure, go hunting, eat them for food, whatever. That's how it's done. But if you were to spray something over the woods to kill every mammal, suddenly all your biodiversity is gone. The ecosystem falls apart. Same thing happens inside of your gut. Okay, I still feel guilty about the dog example.
I know he's crying down here. He's like, I can't believe I'm saying this.
And so we have to understand that antibiotics go after an entire subspecies, like mammals or marine life, not just one individual species. And so we go and take something for a cold or a flu. Maybe it's an infection. It's a staph infection. Cool. Take an antibiotic. But you're killing off all the good with all the bad that respond to that particular type of poison. And this is where the problem comes in, because now what we've done, your ecosystem is in perfect harmony. If provided, best case scenario, you're born vaginally. You are not born C-section. You are bottle fed strictly, or breastfed strictly, not bottle fed. You grow up, say, on a best case scenario on a farm, glyphosate, pesticide free. You interact with the animals, eat the food. You play in the dirt. You're exposed outside. You see people and have a community. You travel. You're constantly inundating your body with new microbes. That's the best case scenario. Worst case, you're C-section birth, strictly bottle fed, grow up in a hyper sanitized home with no pets, high rise building in New York, say middle of the pandemic when everyone's masked and sanitizing. There's no exposure. This is the worst case for development. And so what we do as we take in these certain antibiotics, we typically push ourselves to worst case scenario. We kill off this biodiversity, which leaves us now with what's called opportunistic microbes overgrowing. There are our conventional microbes that we have that run around the body doing these things. We need them. They're part of us. They're called commensal. And then you have your opportunistic. So your staph, your fungi, these other Klebsiellas and different bacteriums we don't want overgrowing. Now, they're all part of the ecosystem. They're part of it naturally. But when they overgrow, it's like having gang members and drug dealers and gun runners instead of police officers, baristas, and school teachers. When you have too much of one, the ecosystem no longer works. The society is dangerous. That happens in your body. These opportunistic overgrow after we've killed the good, they tend to be more antibiotic resistant as well. We kill the good, they overgrow, they wreak havoc, they produce toxins and byproducts which cause disease, leading to more issues, gut issues, etc., which permeate around the body, and now we have multiple sicknesses. But I will put a caveat. Yes, antibiotics destroy a bunch of the good. and the
Mhm.
bad. There are some interesting studies been shown that some antibiotics can target mostly just the bad. 90 to 99% will say, ballparking a number out of my ass. They can destroy way more bad and preserve the good. There is the bad where they kill all the things, but then we also have what we call quote alternatives. To me, they're the only options of antibiotics, antimicrobials, which are naturally from the earth, which
Right.
target the bad and even support or buffer the good to make them better. We have those options as well. So there's always a pros and cons. Life and death, hit me with the antibiotics now, I'll figure it later. They act faster.
Right.
Necrotizing fasciitis, flesh-eating bacteria, load me up. I want to keep my
Right.
limbs. I'll figure out the gut bacteria after the fact.
Right.
But if it's like, oh, I got this low-grade infection or it's a little tonsillitis, like try something else. There's 1,001 alternatives.
Yeah. Wasn't there a kid that did like a study or something, like for his science project? I think
Oregano versus
oregano oil. Yeah, it
penicillin.
was
Yeah.
oregano oil. Yeah. Yeah. And he was like, yeah, it works better than, the antibiotics he was comparing things to.
Yeah,
So,
like 100 times to one. I think it was
yeah.
either penicillin or amoxicillin he compared to oregano oil in a petri dish. It
Uh-huh.
was like a seventh grader or something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
every test he did, it was always better. Even he'd increase or decrease the doses, oregano oil was better every time. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
I know. It's just, there's so many other options out there. So save the antibiotics for the big, the really big stuff like the flesh eating bacteria or, whatever it
Yeah,
might
the
be.
stuff that'll kill you.
The stuff that'll kill you, like you lose your leg and you got a really bad infection, maybe use it then kind of thing. But what you're saying is you can repopulate your gut. So I think that's a fear that people have. Like, if I take an antibiotic, then have I ruined my life forever and I'm just going to be in hospice care, until I die 8
Yes.
years from now, you know?
The answer is, of course, not. I mean, the idea is your gut, the more robust it is, going back to best case scenario on a farm, vaginal birth, breastfed, all these things, it's like seeding a meadow. You have a very robust ecosystem. Think about a meadow that once started before it became the Amazon rainforest. You could
Mhm.
light a fire and burn half of it down in a few years, it'll bounce right back.
Right.
However, if it was just a lightly seeded meadow, it was brand new, not very diverse, not a lot of forestry and animals in there, you burn it down, it may never grow back.
Right.
And so the better off your starting point, the more likely you are to recover. And it's been shown, to start adjusting in a couple of days or weeks, but over about, depends on who you ask, 3 to 6, 12 months, it can typically bounce back. However, if something has crept up in the meantime, big one we see is Candida fungus
Oh
or
yeah.
Clostridia bacterium, which can be really gnarly as
Mhm.
well. We see these at the root of a lot of bowel diseases. So as we start to churn these things out, we have to understand it's not only rebuilding your own microbiome, but also repairing the residual damage created or the opportunistic overgrowth that overgrew in the meantime before you were able to repopulate and rebalance. And that's where you have to go for the next